Thank you for joining us on our QTV Business and Economy program. The Business and Economy program is intended to promote the ideals of a corporate Gambia identity with the objective of forging partnerships through dialogue between the public and the private sector, civil society organizations, and the international community. In today's episode, we shall be discussing the renewed commitment of the ECOWAS heads of states for the launching of a common currency within ECOWAS called the ECO. Not too long ago, we have seen the 15 member country heads of states make a commitment that the ECO should come into reality and function in 2020. The formation of a common currency within the ECOWAS member country states is not a new phenomenon. Actually, it dates back to the year 2001, when WAMI, West Africa Monetary Institute, was created with two principal objectives. The first one was to make technical preparations for the creation of the West Africa Central Bank. And the second one was to help ultimately with the launching of the ECO for the West Africa Monetary Zone, which at the time comprised of Ghana, Gambia, Sierra Leone, Nigeria, and Guinea. Subsequently, Liberia would come as an observer country and I believe ultimately also a member. Why is it that all of a sudden there is a renewed sense of impetus towards the adoption of a common currency? To help us in these discussions, I have invited two distinguished personalities in the names of Dr. Gajigo, who is a consultant and has done consultancy work for the World Bank and the African Development Bank. He is, I must add, also a practicing farmer. Nyang Njie is no guest to all of us. He is a blogger. He also hosts Straight Talk on West Coast Radio and is an economist and a public policy professional. Gentlemen, welcome to the both of you to the Business and Economy program.
Thank you.
An interesting topic, but before we start, I'm going to try and make two clarifications. I want to know where the two of you gentlemen sit as long as your views are concerned in terms of the ECO. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And of course, you can have caveats in terms of whether on what basis it can be good or bad. And two, is it too soon? Are the right frameworks in place for us to adapt? I'll start with you, Nyang.
Thank you so much, Mr. Roberts. I think globalization is a reality. And we either play or be played. And the time has come for the region called ECOWAS to really rethink their position as standalone countries or a nation of, a community of nations. Mm-hmm. And now economic integration has become a reality, not only in the monetary terms, but in the economic terms. You look at NAFTA, you look at the EU, you look at COMESA and all other institutions. They're trying to rationalize and bring economies together. But on the issue of monetary union for West Africa, it's not only a must, but it is something that's urgent and pressing. But nonetheless, it needs to be anchored on sound macroeconomic fundamentals, not political decisions, because political decisions will only give us the wish and the aspirations of our leaders and people. But now, to translate these wishes and aspirations, we need to underpin our wants and needs on sound macro fundamentals. Hence the reason the theory of monetary union comes with a caveat, like you said, it's called convergence. And on the convergence side, you have primary convergence, which are a must have. Be it the interest rates, the ERM mechanisms, be it budgetary deficit, how much can you finance locally the Gambian economy on a bigger framework if you're looking at it within the monetary union. These things, if we don't address and we go the political route, we are going to have a serious problem. And the problem is a misalignment of all these local economies that are supposed to be under one umbrella within the monetary union.
Dr. Gajigo?
Well, I don't think this is the right time for the country, and it's not. I think it's a mistake to think of it as something we must have now. To echo Nyang's point, I would say, Mr. Njie's point, excuse me, I would like to say that economic integration is very important. It's economically beneficial, especially to a small country like the Gambia. We actually should be in the forefront for pushing for it, because our economy is basically too small. And so any initiative that integrates us into the larger West African community is a good thing. But you need to make sure that the conditions are met. And currently, as far as where things are, not only in terms of the convergence criteria, the benefits of this monetary union are oversold right now, and there are a lot of risks. For instance, there's a lot of talk about, this monetary union will bring a lot of intra-regional trade, which will contribute to economic growth. I can tell you right now, in the case of West Africa, this is highly oversold. I mean, intra-regional trade in West Africa is less than 10%. The reason for that is obvious. There are two reasons for it. The economies of all West African countries basically depend on exporting primary goods like agricultural commodities, or oil and gold. The market for these goods are in other parts of the world like Europe and Asia. It is for these reasons that our biggest trading partners are in these regions of the world. So whether you introduce a common currency today, it's not going to change that reality on the ground. You're still going to export what you've been exporting. And intra-regional trade tends to depend on your share of manufacturing. And for West Africa as a whole, the average is around 5%. So you have low share of manufacturing. You have your trade is mostly of primary commodities. There has been very little transformation of economies in terms of industrialization. So monetary union is not going to change that. What would go a long way towards having economic integration is all the numerous protocols that have been signed by ECOWAS countries over the past decades that have not been implemented. This is what would lead to real integration, rather than politicians just wishing their way. You can have real integration based on economic realities where implementation is done, or you can just try to wish it. And right now, this is an issue of just trying to wish economic integration rather than doing work that needs to be done.
Now, I'm going to go back to Nyang and pick on a point that you made regarding the realities of globalization. As you said, you either play or be played. And I hope that we won't be in the be played category of that global phenomenon. But let me now talk on the bit regarding the African Common Free Trade Area, because that in itself one could look at as being a framework or a platform that is being created to help address this issue of not to be played, but rather to be a player within the global setting. And I want to look at this jointly, Africa Common Free Trade Area, and even the very idea of adopting a common currency in the near future, 2020. Those would seem to be complementarities and would equally help in ensuring that we end up being a player and not be played within the globalization framework. How would you address those two, if you will, in view of the point that perhaps it is too soon? We are looking at jumping into the adoption of an ECO when the environment is not nigh, if I may use that term.
Well, I think there are two competing things that right now we need to face head on and tackle. One is called political expediency. Mm-hmm. That's the wish of the politicians. And common sense dictates economic pragmatism. And the issue of economic pragmatism is lacking in terms of our decision making and policy matrices going forward with regards to both the continental free trade issue and the ECOWAS monetary union. Why? Generally, like Dr. Gajigo said, trade is good. Having a free trade area is good. It makes smaller economies benefit. It makes smaller economies have a bigger addressable market. I applaud that. I want it. But the ground has to be fertile for us to sow the seeds of the things that we wish and aspire for. Therefore, I think what we need to do first is not only to go slow, but let the politicians create the vision. We want monetary union. And that's where the politicians should stop and allow the technicians to take the next step. But to take the next step, we need what you call the relinquishing of economic sovereignty, partial economic sovereignty. Because today, if governments are allowed to set their own targets vis-a-vis their budget envelopes, deficit financing will going to be a problem. If we cannot curtail and tame fiscal dominance within the region, i.e. from Nigeria down to Gambia, the idea of coming up with a common currency is futile. So some economic sovereignty needs to be relinquished, but to who? I think we need to put the horse before the cart and make sure that the West Africa Central Bank is an institution, a clearinghouse first and foremost. And we use our currencies that we have at now, whether it's a Naira, Dollar C, you name it. We're allowed to do transnational transactions. I take my Dollar C next door, provided we have an ERM. I take my Dollar C next door, do a transaction. The central bank becomes the clearinghouse to make sure that everything seamlessly happens. First step. The next step is the primary convergence criteria that we have to make sure that we adapt. But in the adaptation of those primary convergence, that's where the relinquishing of economic sovereignty needs to be a serious thing. So the politicians are still having a wishful thinking of having their cake and eating it, because they want something that's very good for the region called a monetary union, but none of them are willing to relinquish parts of their sovereignty, especially as it relates to economic sovereignty, to an entity that will manage all of us, like the European Central Bank.
Let me come to you, Dr. Gajigo, in terms of the intervention that you made. And here you made reference to the realities regarding inter-regional trade amongst the ECOWAS member countries, South-South trade, if you will, which we know is still at levels that is wanting. You also spoke of the reality in the sense that ECOWAS member countries, as it were, have ratified a number of protocols relating to trade and stuff, but yet still, in terms of implementation, it is wanting. And here I can cite the common external tariffs, amongst others as well, in which we have seen countries personally, despite the ratification of these protocols, doing their own thing. Senegal is a case in point. Poultry recently, the importation of poultry, is banned, chicken legs and stuff in Senegal, and and for that reason, they've played with the CET. And one of the things that they said was, they've hidden on the back of the, bird flu, to implement that, strategically and very wise. We have to give credit where credit is due. But what must happen from the trade perspective, and it would be good if you could just give us one or two of these protocols that you alluded to. What must happen for us to begin to push the trade agenda amongst West African countries, notwithstanding the realities that you pointed out, that most of us are engaged in the production of primary commodities. Yes, true, but then within the respective economies, you have, slight variations, if you will, in terms of degree. So if we take Sierra Leone or Gambia, for example, yes, we might be more dependent on primary products. But if you go to Senegal, if you go to Cote d'Ivoire, even Nigeria, there's some degree of manufacturing and processing, value addition going on. So what, in your view, are some of the things that we could do to begin to uplift that trade, if you will?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, our level of our low level of intra-regional trade is a function of the constraints that if you will, farms that engage in cross-border trade actually, the constraints they face. By the way, it's also good to put in context how low intra-regional trade in West Africa is globally. In other parts of the world, you have intra-regional trade. In Europe, it's close to 70-something%.
Yeah.
In Asia, it's close to 50%. The other parts, Latin America, is well over 30-something%. Within Africa as a whole, East Africa inter-regional trade is much higher than West Africa. Yeah. So this single-digit inter-regional trade is really, really low, and obviously there should be a lot of efforts into that countries, that ECOWAS in particular, should be looking into. Should be putting into a lot of effort they should be putting into try to raise this number. So to answer your questions, just let's say, for instance, the idea of free movement of goods, ensuring that it's also good to acknowledge ECOWAS has achieved a few things. For instance, if I want to drive my car to Senegal or to Guinea, I just need the brown card. Yes, and I don't need to have to go and shop for an insurance card there. So that obviously facilitates a lot of things. But as somebody who has actually tried to import goods from other African countries, recently I imported some pineapple plants from Ghana. And I can tell you, I had to be called every single time they reach a border checkpoint, even though I have all of the documents that are required in Ghana before the vehicle departed. But every time, there was a call. For instance, you could not bring the fuel, like extra fuel in the vehicle.
Yeah.
Yes, cannot pass the border into Senegal from Mali. So it had to be dumped, literally, like filled. What was left had to be dumped or left behind, and then that means within a few hours of into Senegal, you need to start looking for fuel. So things like that. Some of them are actually not written. The obstacles are just ad hoc,
uncodified.
Exactly. And so it speaks to the the willingness of the countries actually implement. If I may just got some of the points that he raised is, the issue of countries not engaging on or implementing the requirements or the agreements that they've signed. It's not an issue of per se relinquishing economic sovereignty, but I think it's a much more basic issue: the ability to implement. And if you have a trade agreement, you have that's, for instance, it's based on rules of origin. You need to make sure that the rules of origin are well specified, and each country needs to make sure that they are able to implement them. This is usually one of the very critical aspects of any free trade agreement. For instance, this continent-wide free trade. One of the things on the continent is that in every regional economic zone, whether it's SADC or EAC or ECOWAS, they have different rules of origin. Before you can sign all the agreement, but before it's implemented, you need to make sure that there's harmonization of these rules of origin. So all of these implementations, whether it's monetary union or free trade, depends critically on the ability of the individual countries to implement this agreement. And you need to make sure at any level, at all the various sectors, at the levels of the central government, local government, border crossing checkpoints, internal law enforcement, customs, all of these subnational, these agencies in the country or subnational units are on board. They have a good understanding of what the agreement is, and they're able to implement actually what those agreements are.
Let me come to you, Nyang Njie, and here I want to go as far back as your days at finance. And I'm sure at some point this issue of WAMI and the convergence criteria, you would have had some role in terms of whether the country was actually meeting the primary convergence criteria. Now, I want to get your take on these convergence criteria, and I'm going to give you a free will, if you will, to perhaps give us one or two, you can talk on one or two convergence criteria points, but why is convergence criteria, as you put it earlier, a must, and without us demonstrating consecutively, year in, year out, that we are capable of meeting these convergence criteria throughout? Why is it a must if monetary union should become successful?
See, a currency is nothing but a unit of account. One echo in Gambia must be equivalent to one echo in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea-Bissau, for wherever it is. If not, you will have what you call inter-union, within the union, an imported inflation. Meaning one side of the union, let's say Bissau, they are not respecting the convergence. One echo will not be one echo in terms of value. And what will that do with a currency? You begin to have arbitrage on one currency in terms of the value of the currency.
Vis-a-vis the commodities that it can purchase.
Yes,
yeah.
Because that's the whole idea. When you rationalize an area and make a union, you're trying to reduce the transaction costs. You're trying to make sure that people get value for their money. So there are some key fundamentals that need to be adopted. And key among these convergence is, let's say, deficit financing of your budget, the country's budget. The reason why it should not exceed a ceiling is to make sure that there is harmony across the zone. You look at inflation, for example. It's something that needs to be managed, and equally it has a ceiling. By the way, when the issue of ECHO came in, what happened then in the budgetary process, the Gambia was very mindful of these targets and make sure that whatever we're doing as a country in coming up with a resource envelope or budget execution falls within the framework of having what the ECHO was asking for in terms of convergence. And mind you, there were 2-3 years consecutively that Gambia met the primary convergence targets. Yes, we did. I can fully remember. But what happened thereafter? Fiscal dominance became the order of the day, whereby the Exchequer, Ministry of Finance, got married to the presidency, and the wishes and aspiration of the presidency directed the budget framework rather than our macroeconomic environment and the vision that the country has to come up with, this is going to be our resource envelope. That's when everything went haywire, and not only in Gambia but in other countries. And the reason why I said economic sovereignty, the political class oftentimes want extra expenditure that are not based on macroeconomic logic. So when these things happen, the Ministry of Finance tend to be strange bedfellows with the presidency or the military in some countries because they want to import arms. So what happened? We bloat the budget. When you bloat the budget, naturally things like this happen. But in bloating the budget, you are exercising an economic sovereignty right, meaning it's very irresponsible as a country, but you still can do it. But if you relinquish some powers to, let's say, a central bank of West Africa, your hands are literally tied. And that's the economic sovereignty that I'm talking about, that if we are serious as nations to really have an ECHO which will make a difference in the way we do trade financing and intermediation, we have to be willing to give up some things. But equally, he said that the people who are implementing need to understand what they're implementing. If you look at checkpoints, if you look at ECOWAS reports, the amount of checkpoints in Gambia vis-a-vis our total square kilometers are very irrational, number one. Today, what's stopping Gambia and Senegal at our border points to have a common transaction post? One border point, customs in Gambia, customs in Senegal, sitting in there, immigration in Gambia, immigration in Senegal, sitting within that same building, so it becomes a one-stop shop for people who are trying to cross the border, rather than getting a laissez-passer on this side, getting a pass avant on the other side. It defies logic, but I think the political will is still lacking. The understanding of the protocols we've signed, it's not only lacking, but it's absent in its entirety. And these are the things that's stalling the progress we want to make. So the aspirations are good, but the implementation and executing of these aspirations are flat.
Dr. Gajigo, I'm going to come back to a point that seems to be recurring in this very discussion. You've made the point, he's made the point, in terms of the initial conceptualization framework of the ECO, as it were, with WAMI coming into being and WAMI being given pretty much two principal objectives, one of which is technical preparations towards the creation of a West African Central Bank, and ultimately the launching of the ECO, which we are here discussing today. The West African Central Bank seemingly, even if behind the scenes, even if being virtual, if I may call it that, should have been in existence to do some of the things that he's referring to, where we are trying to see that, okay, convergence is happening and even beginning to trade 15-member ECOWAS countries, well, initially 6, if you look at the West African Monetary Zone, and then doing some settlements behind the scenes, just as Europe did with the euro. And perhaps that should have gone for some number of years, and ultimately the confidence would have been instilled. People would have had a better appreciation of the currency that we are talking about in the first place. And then, of course, all countries would not be on the same level, and this is why we see the the euro launched, as it were, and subsequently other countries brought in. There was a reason for that. But from your reckoning, why is it that perhaps the West Africa Central Bank, that principal objective has not been, has not happened, if you will, because that should have been the harbinger, if you will, towards this whole idea of a monetary union?
No, the countries just simply couldn't get it done. When this agreement was, when WAMI was instituted in 2001, there were a lot of recommendations, and I know there was, a plan of action put in place. The creation of the central bank was one of them. The ECOWAS had even hired a consultant which gave several recommendations, and among them was not only setting up this central bank, but also creating of a West African currency unit, which would essentially be, it would be a reserve currency for the future members of the ECO, and it would also be an asset. And when this, if it had been set up at some point, you would also have like, there would also be a special fund, a stabilization fund. Because once you decide to, you have this one of the things in this convergence criteria is to have the nominal interest rate of all the countries, within a certain pre-specified band. Initially it was 5%. Later on, they couldn't meet that. They increased it to 10%. And the way if you really want to make sure your currency doesn't either appreciate too much or depreciate too much relative to certain value, you need to have a lot of funds. If it's weakening, you need to defend it.
Reserves.
Yes. And so there was a recognition that you needed this stabilization fund, and the central banks would have access to it. It was actually instituted. There was an act. What I wasn't aware of whether it actually ever came into existence, and I wasn't aware of any situation where either Gambia or any other ECOWAS country was making use of funds from this, this shell of a fund to defend their currencies, make sure that they were. I mean, nobody has to be told that, basically none of these countries were meeting those conditions consistently in terms of making sure that the nominal exchange rates were within specified bands. So the exchange rate mechanism that needed to be in place just didn't function at all. So I think it wasn't an issue of like will. There seems to have been some wishes or will, if you would say, but you just have not been able to implement it. And they've in the early years when they set these conditions, what the other conditions were like debt, for instance, would be like 60% of your GDP or less. That became a problem. That was wasn't just weakened, was completely removed. Deficit was weakened. The single-digit inflation rate, which was initially supposed to be around 5%, was completely weakened. The other part about the real interest rate being positive, that was sort of a bit, there wasn't a specific number to that. But basically, no country has been consistently able to meet it over a long period of time. Some countries, 1 year, 2 years, 2 years, they've been able to meet it. So it just became, there are a lot of fundamental problems with the economies that just made it very difficult to do. So I think, the lack of the existence of the West African Central Bank is just a specific example of a general problem. The general problem was the inability of these countries to meet the criteria that they need. I mean, when you talk about the convergence criteria, the reason why it's important is that when you are in a monetary union, you basically have all agreed to have a fixed exchange rate with yourself. So the convergence criteria is sort of like mimicking the conditions before the monetary union comes into existence. And those conditions are a bit weaker than the actual monetary union. So if you can't meet those weakened conditions beforehand, how are you going to make the monetary union actually work when the time comes?
So those were your conditions precedent, if you will.
Yeah.
Let me come back to you, Nyang. We know that in this part of the world, politicians can sometimes have their way over technocrats. And I'm sure if you talk to any well-wishing or any technocrat, central banker for that matter, who's worth, his or her salt, they will probably tell you the ECHO, good idea, but too soon, vis-a-vis the things that needs to happen before it actually is implemented. But we know that the recent commitment by the heads of states in terms of launching of the ECHO in 2020, I don't think it's specified where in 2020. I hope not January, because January is too soon, would be rather too soon. But let's just say for the benefit of doubt that it's even December 2020. Even with December 2020, the creation of a central bank, maybe it has been created, I don't know. Maybe the frameworks in terms of its creation is ongoing behind the scenes. But in the event that the politicians get their way and come 2020, we are implementing and launching the ECHO. In view of the points that you made vis-a-vis the relevance of us meeting the convergence criteria beforehand, if that doesn't happen and the ECHO is launched, what do you foresee?
Well, I will tell you now, and I will repeat the same thing post-launch of the ECHO, that it's a dead-on-arrival initiative. Economies are organisms. They respond to stimulus, and economies are not stupid. When I say economies, I'm not talking about us, the practitioners, but the organism we call an economy. It's not stupid. It rewards and it punishes equally. If West Africa decides to go the political route, there will be chaos, and that chaos will punish all of us by the whole region having a slow growth, number one. Also, there will be diversion of trade. whether we like it or not, because the transaction cost of doing business in this zone is going to be exorbitant to the point that most investors will not have a visibility tunnel to see what's going to happen down the line. And that will create de-investment in the zone overall. We know that parts of the zone are heavily reliant on oil and gas. This needs import of capex as it relates to capital items. Now, if you have a currency that you cannot even predict how it's going to behave in the next 3 to 6 hours, let alone the next day, most serious, significant capital investors will put the brake. If they can move elsewhere, they will move. If they can't move, they will defer. But I'm going back a little bit. The reason why in the early 2000s it was easy for countries like Gambia, Sierra Leone to meet these targets is because of HIPIC 1 and HIPIC 2. This was a program, the Highly Indebted Poor Country Initiative. It was a program that had key indicators, macroeconomic indicators, that were triggers. And so it wasn't the countries willing to meet the convergence criteria that were set, but it was the HIPIC initiative that we were trying to access that forced us to align with the convergence criteria. Now, that HIPIC initiative is over, both HIPIC 1, HIPIC 2, Strategy for Poverty Alleviation. Before it was Strategy for Poverty Alleviation, HIPIC 1 and HIPIC 2. They're over with. So now our macro indicators have gone haywire once again. So what do we need to do? It's not to think about post-lunch 2020. How can we convince our political class that they're signing a dead wish for economies that are trying to resuscitate, economies that are trying to kick off again? They need to rethink their position if they don't want to spoil the little gains some countries have made or the turnaround other countries are trying to be embarking on as we speak.
Let me come to you, Dr. Gajigo. I mean, you spoke about the initial days in which there was this idea of a stabilization fund, which perhaps never saw the light of day. But let's bring it closer to home. And let's look at even our reserves in terms of the months of import cover. There has been times when this country has boasted, and Nyang, you can correct me if I'm wrong, of up to 6 months of import cover. And we have seen that slipped over the years. I don't know where it currently is, but I would very much doubt if it's up to 5 months of import cover, maybe 3, 4 months of import cover. Now, the point I want to make is, what is the role of the central bank in this whole arena of adoption of the ECO? Yes, we know that Gambia has been part of the WAMSI from day one. And we know that, as he rightly said, there's been times that Gambia has done very well in terms of meeting sometimes, I mean, all of the primary convergence criteria and slippages oftentimes here and there. But what is the role of the central bank in all of this? I ask this question because, I mean, I have spoken to some few people, and they have told me that as long as the role of the central bank is concerned, I mean, ECOWAS has created a sensitization team that should go around these countries and talk about this ECO and the launching of the ECO and everything that it entails. So the central bank is kind of taking a secondary role, if you will, and leaving the responsibility, you know, to ECOWAS. Should this be the case? Because I believe that ECOWAS, as it were formed by sovereign states, and these sovereign states have obligations to their citizenry in terms of even trying to tell them, informing them, sensitizing them about this whole idea and initiative behind the ECO. What is your take? On this point?
I'd just like to correct one. I don't think they've taken a second step. I think they have been incommunicado. They basically are in hiding. I mean, somebody taking a second step would be like, at least, let's say, if I take if I'm a step behind Mr. Njie here, maybe, I'll interject just once in a while. But so far, our central bank has been completely and dead silence, on this issue. Which is quite unfortunate. I mean, when you talk about a monetary union, you're talking about, basically monetary policy. Yeah. Our premier institution for monetary policy is the central bank. Now, obviously, there are, all aspects of our economy would have to play a part, because some aspects of the convergence criteria are fiscal in nature, like the debt and budget deficit. Those are fiscal. But obviously, things about other aspects of, the key parts of, convertibility of the currency, like which institutions have to make sure that, our exchange rates are within a certain band. That this is the role of the central bank. And also, since WAMI was created, there are different sub-units that were formed to actually do the legwork behind the scenes, sort of, to make it work. And among them are, like, groups concerned about governors, groups that compose of only directors of research. These are the people, for instance, that actually added some flexibility and the weakening of the convergence criteria. So our central bank, has been involved, or should have been. If they have not been sleeping at these meetings, they should have been involved. They should be quite, up to speed on what has been happening. But much more importantly, I think, to answer the latter part of your question, is that they have a responsibility, and an obligation to really, explain not only to the political class or the political leadership, but the country as a whole, the ramification of this, of the country going into a monetary union. Because, the implication, the effects of monetary union will affect every facet of society. Basically, we are going to have to give up our monetary policy completely. We'll still have a fiscal policy to some degree, but even that will be circumscribed to some extent. But monetary policy, basically, it means, individual countries no longer have control over it. There's going to be free capital movement. Even things like credit policies would have to be harmonized. Anything to do with monetary policy, basically now has to be, done at the level of the West African Central Bank when created, if this monetary union goes into effect. So the amount of information, sensitization, the effect, the role that has to be there, not only for the Ministry of Finance, but the central bank itself is a lot. And the fact that we have been getting nothing but silence is a huge disappointment. And for them to make a statement, a claim that, for instance, the issue of sensitization has been given to ECOWAS makes no sense. ECOWAS, as you said, is an organization created by sovereign states. Right now, you can have an ECOWAS team that goes around, country by country to do it. Tell me which is more efficient. An ECOWAS team going country by country, or the actual monetary experts in the country taking their own monetary experts, going on national TV, going on radio, writing columns in newspapers and explaining exactly what the implications are for the economy, what we should expect once we join, what is the likely effect for all of the various sectors of our economy. This is really, this is the role of our local monetary experts. So
yeah, let me come to you and make this point, following up from the sensitization bit that he spoke about. I see, because monetary union, as it were, is within the services gamut, of an economy, so to speak. Now, I see a lot of opportunities even within this challenging aspiration of a common currency. Now, if sensitization had really kicked off and the central bank and both the Ministry of Finance take it seriously to the point where they engage the citizenry and told them, even the ordinary Gambian could perhaps begin to sense opportunities in terms of how to position themselves so that when the ECO is launched, we would not be found wanting and trying to find our fit, because by the time we really find our fit, other countries within the ECOWAS bloc would have perhaps latched onto opportunities that we perhaps never thought about, because the sensitization and the discussion, the public discourse, did not happen. And I want to get your view on this. I mean, do you think that, perhaps the central bank or even the Ministry of Finance is hesitant to discuss this because maybe they don't know where to start, or maybe they are at variance with the political elite, who think that this should happen, but behind the scenes they are like, nah, this should not happen, and because of that, they are not really discussing it. But more on the opportunities that exist within an ECO, us ECO member countries adopting the ECO, and the opportunities that may exist for the citizenry, especially him. I mean, he made a very good point. Credit reference bureaus, even the banks, the foreign exchange bureaus, because, there's going to be some change, there's going to be some shift. So how do you position yourself so that you are not left behind?
First thing first, there is what you call a first mover advantage. For that first mover advantage to be effective, there has to be the absence or the reduction of information asymmetries, whereby people are having good information. How can we have good information in the absence of sensitization? Ministry of Finance is not the one wanting here, because monetary unions are premised on monetary management. So it's the role of the central bank. And mind you, I always tell people that the dollar, the United States dollar, is part of a monetary union. That's why you have the Federal Reserve Board with 13 governors, and these 13 governors have a chairman of the board. The Bank of San Francisco, Bank of Washington, Bank of St. Louis, Bank of New York, Bank of Chicago. It's the same thing. They make sure inflation within that area, the geographic area where the Bank of New York covers, is within this. They work with the Treasury Department to make sure that the Office of the Management of Budget, this is what they do as it relates to budget, and they set basic monetary policy. Either two things are happening. The governors of our banks, central banks in West Africa, are reluctant because they may see themselves not to be redundant, but to be less influential. So should we leave the process in their hands, or should we have others who will force them to drive the process that they should in the interest of what the political class wants us to achieve? But back to the issue of sensitization. I think in today's world, information is monetized. It's with good information, for that matter, that makes you make money. If we have a good sensitization program about what the ECO is intended to do, entrepreneurs will start thinking of creating new businesses out of the launch of this currency. Companies may restructure or remodel their business practices, because letters of credit and some of these things may be a thing of the past because of the common area they may be working, especially for their suppliers. Let's say a poultry farmer who always have to go and look for CFA to pay for feed coming from Grand Moulin or Sedima in Senegal. All of these things will change. The transaction cost will change, cost of production will change, and ultimately, price levels are going to change. But this has to be a discussion, and this discussion must be headed not by the Ministry of Finance, but the governor of the central bank, and when at the level of the governor, the director of research, the foreign department should be very important. And also, I think they have what you call Economic Policy Committee, EMC, or whatever it is. They need to be at the forefront of this crusade. And these are deliverables that they should not outsource to any other entity, even the ultra entity called ECOWAS, because it's us, the sovereign Gambians, who want to be part of something. So the responsibility is not for ECOWAS to come to me, but the proxy I have in the governor of the central bank as my monetary management executive to come and say, this is what we're going to do, this is how it's going to happen. It may impact adversely this way, but equally there are opportunities that it can create. Then everyone within the economy will realign their processes, practices, and models to make sure that if this thing comes to be, they will not be adversely affected. If not, there's going to be a lot of losses for people in this economy, and that may shrink the economy. And that's the chaos I was talking earlier. Because if we are not adequately informed, chaos will ensue economically, and that will force an economic downturn for already a distressed economy like ours. This country is virtually bankrupt.
Dr. Gajigo, I'm going to come to a point, and I know we are talking of the adoption of the ECO. Initially, it was to cover 6 West African countries, or ECOWAS member states, and that is the West Africa Monetary Zone. Now it has transcended those 6 countries and now looks at the entire 15 ECOWAS member countries. If you look at the CEDEAO region, the Francophone region of ECOWAS, they have been doing a whole lot much better than what their Anglophone counterparts are doing. And perhaps it is as a reason of the Franc zone, because they have shared a common currency for quite some time now. But I want to get your perspective in terms of the role of France in underpinning the CFA zone, and whether with the objective of the ECO, as it were, would France be willing to let go of that control? Because we know the benefit that is accruing to France as a result of them being the lender of last resort, if I may put it that way, to the Francophone zone. What is your take on that? And what is your take on the fact that Francophone ECOWAS is doing a whole lot more in terms of the convergence criteria compared to its Anglophone counterparts?
Well, I have an issue with one of the premises, though. It's not. I'm not sure it's actually the case that economically the CFA countries are doing better than their Anglophone counterparts.
In the convergence criteria?
Well, see, the convergence, because once you are a member of monetary union already, your hands are a bit tied. So, because as you know, already these countries have been part of this CFA monetary union for almost 60 years, about 58 to 60 years. Yeah. So, for instance, currently as a whole, their inflation rate is very low, average of around 3%. They are also constrained to how much they can, go in terms of deficits and other things like that. At the same time, also, they have, given that they don't have full control of their monetary policy, even their own central bank, because they have to peg their, their currency to the French franc before and now to the euro. It's there would be, they essentially have traded in a lot of economic sovereignty, I think. So, in terms of macroeconomic indicators like that, they look on paper better than their non-CFA neighbors. But those macroeconomic indicators are not the end goal of economies. They are just means to an end. We don't value inflation just for the sake of it to be low, but it leads to a stable macroeconomic situation which can engender growth. So when you take the CFA countries as a zone and compare them to the non-CFA countries, actually there is very little different in terms of economic growth. In fact, they have experienced some effects that are actually bad for them. Because of this fixed exchange rate, the CFA has been largely overvalued for a long time, for decades, which was why there was a very sudden devaluation of it a few decades ago, which led to huge adjustment costs for those countries. And again, of course, that readjustment, and that re-evaluation of the currency helped a bit. But then there is even talk today that there is still the overvaluation pressure is still building up. The problem of that is that it's not good for your manufacturing sector. It's not good for your sector, if you're trying to export, because your goods are a lot more expensive than they should be. Yes. So now, to ask your later question, I'm not sure I can really answer that very well, because in terms of the political economy of France's control of these CFA countries, honestly, I cannot talk very intelligently about that, since my knowledge of it is very limited.
Okay.
Though I would think that to the extent that this union, this sort of marriage has existed for such a long time between France and its former colonies, there must be something in it for them that has benefited them. Now, whether that benefit is economic or political or some sort of political control, I'm not quite sure. But I would think that to the extent that such a benefit exists, it wouldn't be easy for these CFA countries to disengage themselves from something that has been in existence for almost six decades.
Let me come to you with the last point, Nyang Njie. And here we spoke of the fiscal convergence, the convergence criteria relating to fiscal deficit. Sidia Jatta was a National Assembly member making a case against the $90 million that has been contracted by the government towards the OIC. Do you see that, would you say that his arguments were plausible in terms of what that could have, the impact that could have on our fiscal balance vis-a-vis the convergence criteria of fiscal, prudence and discipline?
Okay, I will say that in the absence of credible, good information, the rumor mill thrives. Fundamentally, there was an error in reporting that to the parliament. It's not a $93 million loan. It's a $60.5 million loan. The total package is 93.5, or 93 million rather. This is what happened, and it should have been made clear by the Minister of Finance on the table that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, by way of the Saudi Fund and the Royal Court, gave us an envelope. But the envelope is as good as free money. They gave us $32.5 million free of charge to enhance water and electricity, not only for the OIC concentrated area, that is Bijilo, Senegambia, Palmarima area. No, they say build new boreholes around Sanyang, run clear transmission water pipes from Sanyang all the way to a treatment plant somewhere in Sukuta, process that water and push it in to all your neighborhoods. But not only that, build more overhead tanks so that people will now have pressure for their water. But not only that, we will give you additional money to make sure that your boreholes are not tied to the national electric grid, but a standalone, so that when your national electric grid goes off, water is still being pumped free of charge. Now the 60 million is for three things. 50 kilometers of secondary roads, so that our national trunk, which is always busy during the day, is freed up, meaning you can now leave from Kotu Junction all the way to the turntable and all the way to Ghana Town without getting on the main road. But the term sheet is what makes this attractive. A 5-year grace, a 30-year repayment, 0% interest, 1% admin cost for the loan, and a possibility of write-off if the monies are used for what they're intended for. So well, that in itself is good.
Well, that is where we're going to draw the curtains, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us on this program. I think an excellent clarification there. The discussions on the ECHO is the first episode, but it's not going to stop here. The discussions will ensue and will continue. Until we come your way next time, thank you for joining us and goodbye.